Have you ever known someone who has supposedly or evidentially done bad things, and when you heard about it you thought, wow, I never expected that? Over the course of our lives we are likely to shake hands with at least one person that has actually murdered someone. Statistically spoken, at least. So with that in mind, we might have been just the luckiest person on earth to escape a murderer on this one fateful day. I served as NBC defense sergeant in a town called Höxter. It lies directly at the river Weser in pretty much the exact middle of Germany. It's surrounded by hills and lush forests, and judging from the nature around, I was happy to call it my home for 8 years. Over time, I learned that when it came to sports, you could split the preferences of my platoon in 3 groups. There were the team players, who played basically any team-based or competitive sport all the time, like mostly football or volleyball. Then there were the bodybuilders, who took every chance they got to go pump iron. And last but not least, there were the cardiacs. Basically everyone who did not fall in one of the other 2 categories. They were mostly out for runs, military fitness cross runs with full gear and such. I didn't like playing football or soccer, and the gym was so small that not even a full squad could fit in there at the same time. So naturally, I went with the cardiacs. After I went with the usual suggested routes provided by my comrades, I started developing my own tracks based on how fit and well I felt at any given day. The tracks ranged from easy and short over even ground to runs sometimes over several hills, spanning a length of up to 17 kilometers or 10 miles in total. So basically, there was a track for every mood for me. One day in, I think it was June, I was on one of my longer runs. I spared myself the hills, but I still had about 14 kilometers or 8.7 miles to go. My path took me from a barracks through the town into the next adjacent village called Bosseborn, and from there through a loop back again. In Bosseborn I came across a man leaving his house as I was running past. Naturally, we greeted each other, and when I came back the same way, he still was outside and took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. He asked me if I was actually coming from the barracks, to which I replied positively. He then went on talking about how this must already have been quite a run, since the barracks were about 5 miles away from his house. He noticed my dialect and determined that I was not from around the area, which was true. So he proceeded to suggest me some places to visit and some trails for my next runs. We ended up chatting for a couple of minutes before I continued on my way. However, over the years, I took this track a couple of times more often, and some few times that guy was outside again, and we would always chat a bit about how the week was going and other basic nonsense. I learned that his name was Willy and he was married. He seemed to be a pretty chill guy. A bit, I don't want to say slow, but he definitely came off as kind of mentally challenged. But he was straightforward and even pretty sympathetic. His house wasn't quite my taste. It was situated directly at the streets, there was no garden, and it seemed a bit run down. But that all came as no surprise, given that I perceived Willy to be a bit slow, and in the end, hey, he did have his own house after all. As time went by and I came closer to my regular discharge from the army, I decided to take my runs down the route past Willy's home frequently, in hopes of getting a chance to say goodbye. However, I never saw him again outside. And for me to just knock on his door to give my farewell was just kind of absurd. I mean, I was thinking about it, but we didn't know each other really. We were just 2 strangers who talked on different occasions for some minute and exchanged names and some pleasantries. Definitely not enough for me to just make a fuss out of my discharge like that. And so I left the army and the town of Höxter to study social science at the Humboldt University in Berlin, starting in October of 2015, without having seen Willy again. After my first semester, I first heard some people talking about Höxter frequently. I didn't think much of it until my old home's name fell more and more often. At first I thought I was just becoming paranoid from nostalgia. I actually had a lot of trouble adapting to a lifestyle as a civilian again, let alone a university student. When I visited my family, however, my mother asked me if I heard what happened, and of course she too was talking about my old home. I do not watch TV, listen to the radio or read newspapers, so when it comes to news I am basically never really up to date. She told me that there was a big criminal case near my barracks with multiple people dead, and when she showed me the picture of where it all actually happened, I recognized it immediately as Willie's house. My very first reaction was me feeling sick to the stomach. My eyes widened, and my mother immediately knew that I recognized the place. I believed Willie and his wife got killed, and I was flabbergasted and in plain shock how someone could kill them. I was asking myself how depraved of a human being someone must be to go out and kill a mentally challenged, nice man and his wife. I grabbed the newspaper in disbelief and started to read, and with every word, my shock went deeper and deeper. But for another reason. Willie was not dead. He and his wife were actual murderers. At least 2 women were tortured over weeks and months until they died by his and his wife's hands. More women were supposedly able to flee or got released, and no one went to the police out of sheer fear for their lives, which was very much given, it seems. Willie and his wife were complete psychopaths. Willie was mostly calling the shots, and his wife just obeyed out of fear because she would have been his victim if it wasn't for the other women. But still, she had a hand in all of this too. Together they lured women to their homes just to torture and eventually kill them. The only thing that they were looking for in their victims was that they had to have only few or better even no friends or family, so no one would miss them or even search for them. Willie had these women write suicide notes before killing them, and he sent them to their friends and family. His overall goal was to torture the women so much that in the end they would actually really try to commit suicide. He wanted them to see death as a release they would wish for. This guy was... I have seen and heard a lot of horrible stuff before already, but the things he did to his victims were just on another level. He disposed of one of the bodies in the oven, and when bone fragments and teeth did not burn to ashes, he just simply smashed them with a hammer to leave no identifiable evidence. With every bit of information, every single line of text I read of this news article, I became more and more disturbed. I shook hands with a monster. Based on his victims, I myself was never in real danger. I was male, very fit, and if I would have been apprehended, a lot of people would have been looking for me. But just thinking about what kind of person I had these friendly talks with in front of this house. And at this time, there actually was a woman being tortured, shackled up in the upper floor or the basement while I was having these short chats with him. And I had no idea, and didn't, or better said couldn't help. This still makes me anxious when I think back. Willie, or Wilfried as his real full name was sentenced to 11 years, his wife to 13. Willie actually had an IQ of 59, which meant by German law that he was considered insane and thus not criminally liable. He was placed in a psychiatric ward for the criminally insane. His wife got 13 years because she actually testified and confessed to everything. Prosecution was demanding life sentences without parole for both. And based on what I read about the torture and the actual planning that went into this with the fake suicide notes and stuff, I myself do not really buy the part of actual insanity. I would want this monster to be locked up for good, which is the total opposite of what I would have actually wished him if we would have met this one time again back then. For months I have blamed myself for just not stepping up to his front door and knocking. If I would have actually knocked on the door, maybe he would have opened. And maybe, just maybe, I could have heard the tortured woman screaming for help, trying to get my attention, and done something. I might have been able to stop this monster and save a life if I would have just done that. But on the other hand, maybe I was the lucky one for not doing that.